Alrighty, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Subscribing to My Podcast. Because I have a new guest featured every week, it makes it very difficult to maintain consistent viewership. So if there's one thing that you can do to support me or the guest featured on the show, it's by interacting with my channel in every way that you can. You can always decide to unsubscribe later if you decide that you hate me or my show. With that plugging aside, enjoy my discussion with... Rawan Farhan is the co-president of the Law Students for Free Palestine, and we're joined by Sam England, who is the secretary for the same organization. We actually met a couple weeks ago and talked about the conversation that we were going to have, and I thought it was really interesting and really lovely, and it just got me excited for using this new studio with some of our new producers. So a lot going on in this episode, but I'm really excited to talk about the issue, kind of get both perspectives, but most importantly, the Palestinian perspective, and hopefully, since this is the first time I'm having this conversation, that I'll get a little bit of education and be able to talk in this realm a little bit more. But I would love for you guys to introduce yourselves and then tell the viewers some important things that they should know about you.
So I'm Rawan. I'm a 3L at OU Law, and I'm co-president of Law Students for Free Palestine.
I love an icebreaker. My name is Sam England. I am also a 3L at OU Law, and I am the secretary, like was previously said, and yeah, I don't know. I'm excited and scared to be here.
Yeah, well, first off, I think it's incredibly brave, and I think it speaks to the passion that both of you have to come on a show and talk about controversial issues, full stop. No matter what position you're defending, no matter what it is, it's just scary to put your thoughts out there in the real world, and I think that should be, appreciated for us in the audience. But tell me a little bit about your guys' organization. What do you do? What does it do? And what does it stand for? Just, set the grounds for what you guys do on campus.
So we're Law Students for Free Palestine. Basically, we started our org about a month after October 7th. And it was after we saw that there was a lot of silence about what was going on in Gaza. And, as a law school, you'd think there would be more discourse about, international law violations and things like that.
Yeah, especially because, there's specifically, an international law group. And I think based off of, maybe the neutrality that some of those groups want to present, they kind of felt like it wasn't their place to speak about it, which was a little bit disappointing. But, I mean, from such, a... law school can feel very much like, oh, my employment is on the line when I do things. And so I think it felt like a lot of people had that in mind. And I think, I don't want to speak for one, but a lot of it was just we need to have a space where people feel like they can express their rage behind what we're seeing and give an outlet to that where we're not necessarily being held down by appearing neutral, I guess.
Right. We just wanted to make sure that people we're able to talk about Palestine, because you should be able to speak about injustices that are happening, and especially if we are the ones paying for these injustices to happen. So it was just almost kind of a shock to see that, and so that's why we kind of started this group informally, and then we made it an official registered student org a few months after that. And then we've just been kind of holding events to raise awareness. It's our main goal is just to always keep talking about Palestine, to make sure that, especially because, before October 7th, Palestine was almost like a taboo, and especially right after October 7th. And so we just wanted to make sure that people do know who the victims are in this story, who is perpetrating these atrocities. And so that's kind of been our goal ever since we started.
Yeah, just to get a little bit more specific, what does that look like when you guys are doing these events? What does spreading the message look like? What events do you guys do? What does, spreading the news and information look like? What are you guys prioritizing when you're doing these events?
So we've done panels. We've had experts come and talk. We had an international genocide scholar come, and he spoke about why this is a genocide. He's actually Israeli. So that was kind of something that broke some of the, we'll say, opposing side, because what do you have to say after that? And we've had fundraisers almost every semester, and we've hosted a doctor who volunteered in Gaza to come tell us what he talked about. What else?
I don't know. That doctor was really impactful. I feel like a lot of people left that meeting with tears. Like, people were literally crying the whole meeting. Like, I think it's just really highlighting people's voices around the conversation. We also did like a campaign where we were leaving flyers on the tables, just kind of utilizing our free speech rights on campus the best we could.
Just like a story from Gaza every week. We did that. And we kind of just flyered around the campus.
Just paper everywhere.
Yeah. Law students love to kill trees.
Yeah, right. Well, I think an important foundation setting question for this whole conversation is kind of the why. Like, why is it important? Why should we care about this kind of stuff? I know that for you two who are very educated, it's somewhat easy to figure out why. But for those people who maybe don't know about the issue or have only heard about it and avoided it, like, what sell or pitch do you guys have that this is important, that this matters, and that they should care about this issue?
So this is obviously most important, where you have a genocide happening. The whole world should be going to stop it, regardless of whether you are involved or not, which this country very much is involved, because the US is the one who supplies Israel. Israel can't be doing any of the stuff that it's doing right now without the US's support. And so especially over here, we have a duty to talk about Palestine, to advocate for Palestine, to make sure that this stops. But, even just in general, under international law, you do have an obligation to stop genocide, even if you're not, directly involved or complicit. So I think it's just a human duty.
Right.
I think kind of going off of that, like, just seeing the devastation that has, the devastation has always existed in this conflict. Like, it's not just something new. Like, this didn't just start on October 7th. Like, this is something that's gone on for generations and no one has stepped in to stop it. And so I think for me, part of it is, like, I studied undergrad in political science. Like, a lot of the stuff that I learned about was, like, international law and that kind of thing. And it's one thing for people to say, oh, Israel deserves their right to defend themselves. It's a whole other thing when they are indiscriminately bombing people and you watch this entire thing unfold in front of you. It's not supposed to be indiscriminate. You're supposed to specifically target the people that you're targeting. It's not just like, you retaliate because you retaliate. Like, you have laws that you're supposed to follow, and we want to say that we're like a society of laws. You have to back that up by action, and the U.S. has a lot of, I think, audacity to criticize people, ignore international law just because we can, because we have the power to do so, and we just continue to allow Israel to do what it wants because it knows that it can. And I think that's why we have this duty, like Rawan said, to speak up, because if we don't raise like a ruckus, if we don't make this state do something, like, no one is going to do anything, because if the US has no incentive to do something, they're not going to do it. And Israel is the same way. And so if the parent allows the child to continue to do what it wants to do, like, it's just going to wreak havoc forever.
Yeah, and I think that there's a sentiment, and I don't know how popular it is, but the idea that we shouldn't be getting involved in anything that, it's like prioritize the United States, something like that. And so they would say that, like, caring about this, or ironically funding it, even though they probably would support that. But these people are saying that we shouldn't be getting involved in something that doesn't affect us. Do you guys have, how do you react to people who have that sort of isolationist mentality?
I think we do agree that the U.S. shouldn't be involved, because the U.S. is entirely complicit in what's going on. It's a direct participant. And so, yes, we do agree that the U.S. shouldn't be involved, that the U.S. should be spending the billions of dollars it sends Israel for its weapons on the people here, like for people's tuition, for people's health care, Israelis get great health care with the $3 billion that the U.S. sends them every year. And so that should be spent over here.
Yeah, I don't know. You said something and now it's lost on me what you just said. But I think, like, again, with, like, the audacity that the U.S. has to say, like, don't get involved, don't do this, don't do that. But, like, we've had our fingers in so many pies for so long. And I think it's really interesting to say, like, oh, we should be focusing on our own policies, our own internal issues. But it's like a lot of these things the U.S. has caused by its own interference. Like, by intervening after World War II. Like, we caused this to happen. For example, there was, like, an issue in Catalonia in Spain in, like, 2019, 2018, where they were trying to, like, emancipate themselves, basically. when we draw these arbitrary lines in like in states where things like don't exist, it's based off of like transitory sort of like immigration patterns of people that are not necessarily like tied to a specific piece of land. Like we exist on these ideas that we're divided by borders, but like a lot of people don't exist that way. And so when we went in there and we said, hey, we're going to partition everything, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, like you're interfering in people's like livelihoods.
Yeah, I mean,
and
people's
your
right to self-determination.
people's right to self-determination, and we want to act like, oh, you deserve this right to, you know, have your own nation, you're your own independent sovereign. But it's like we're stepping on their sovereignty in the same breath. Like I think it's really hypocritical and ironic that we were so behind Ukraine. And I think it really is like, not to drop a hot button topic word, but like it feels very like white supremacist to say, yes, let's back Ukraine, let's back their sovereignty, we care so much about state sovereignty. But when it happens to a brown population of Muslims that we have like a complex history with, like we're no longer about sovereignty. We don't care about state sovereignty. We don't care about self-determination. Exactly.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to go off there. I think we can just start talking about just like the general issue and start, you know, looping people in, the viewers, into like what's going on and what's happening here. So if you just want to set the groundwork for the current situation that we are in right now, and then any relevant history that you think plays into the current history that we're in right now, just to catch people up to speed as to what's happening.
Okay, so right now, Palestinians, not just people in Gaza, but Palestinians live under occupation of the state of Israel. And so you have people in Gaza going through a genocide. You have people in the West Bank going through ethnic cleansing. Right now, Israel is moving to annex the West Bank, completely illegal under international law. And you have Palestinians who live in Israel living under apartheid as second-class citizens. And so this kind of all started, you know, obviously I can't go through the whole history, but, you know, in 1947, the UN decided to partition Israel and Palestine after Jewish immigrants were told to come under the British mandate. They were told that they can have Israel on Palestinian land, and Palestinians were living there. But the Jewish population, which was very, very small at the time, they were given 55% of the land, I believe, even though they were small in terms of numbers. And the Palestinians who were there were forced to be displaced. And that's like hundreds of thousands of Palestinians had to leave their homes so that these people can come and live on their land. And so obviously there's, you know, fighting after that. People, of course, are not happy. You know, it's really an imperialist project. You know, you have a bunch of people coming onto Palestinian land and stealing it and now committing a genocide. So you can see how when you're talking about an occupation, it's not really a both sides issue. You can't make it seem as if Palestinians and Israelis are on equal footing here. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of the situation that we're seeing today. So we can't speak of this as a war or anything like that. Do you have anything to add?
I don't really think I have notes. That was good.
yeah, that sounds about right. So I would say, and I talked to you guys about this before, but my role is to kind of be, despite what my beliefs are, which I would just say is uneducated, full stop. Despite what my beliefs are, I do understand the macro argument that the pro-Israel people are saying. So just to give context, just so that people don't feel like you guys are partaking in propaganda on a certain side, I'm going to be the voice of the pro-Israel people and try to just like give out the arguments just to make sure that we're hearing the full story. And then hopefully this will broaden the conversation that we're having too, as more details will come out and whatever. So I would say that the first thing that I hear pretty often is that the original land did not belong to a Palestinian people, that it belonged to the Ottoman Empire, who lost the First World War, something along those lines, and then they sold the land to Britain, and then that they kind of divided that land up as they saw fit, given that they had purchased it or received it via losing the war. Does this kind of change any of the foundations of the conversation, or like, I guess, how do you guys feel about that kind of idea.
So, I mean, that land was under Ottoman control, but it doesn't not mean that Arabs, Palestinians were not living there. So that doesn't change anything. And I don't think the British bought the land, but I think they took control of the land, and the Ottoman Empire obviously dissolved and they lost control there. And I think Jewish immigrants began buying land from Arab landowners. But, up until 1947, I think that was about 6% of the land. So it was a very small amount. But by 1947, they got 55% of the land. And it's only increased ever since then.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, and I think the important foundational aspect of that is when you're talking about an original Palestinian people, sometimes it's hard for people to grasp how could it be a people that's separate than maybe the people who owned it or something like that, and you would begin to question the origins of that land if it's it's a certain type of people, but they aren't considered Ottomans despite them being in the land that's Ottoman. You know what I mean? Do you have any clarifications on this kind of?
I mean, the people who live on the land, who have lived on the land for thousands of years, own the land. I think that's common sense. I don't think you need to know the law to figure that out, but we do learn these kinds of things in property. And I think even if you are, it's not hard to figure out that people who have lived on the land for thousands of years own the land. And so you can't just kick people off their land that way. Imagine you were in your house, you've been living there for 30 years in Russia. I don't know,
Right.
You're not Russian, but it's your land. And then somebody just comes and kicks you out.
Mm-hmm.
And they tell you that if you don't leave, they'll kill you. And that's what happened. There were massacres and there were mass displacements during that time. It's called the Nakba, when that happened in 1947. And that was just a really dark period in history. And we're going through an even darker period right now.
Yeah. Well, and that makes sense. And like I said, I do think that the idea of land, it's kind of hard because like I said, my history is just not very good. So did the original Palestinians who were on that land, did they fight in the war for the Ottoman Empire, or were they complicit in Ottoman Empire's fight in that war, or were they just a completely unrelated people in a land that happened to be owned by the Ottoman Empire? Do you know what I'm asking?
I think the Ottoman Empire was just kind of, it's like an empire,
Sure. Yeah.
Taking over people's lands, and then it just lost control, and then Arabs were colonized by the British. Mm-hmm. So, and it's just part of history, but
I think
the time, people never changed.
Yeah, it was just a lot of expansion by the Ottoman Empire, and I think that's kind of what made it run thin, I think. Yeah. And I mean, going back to the part about Britain purchasing the land, even if they purchased the land, sure, they are the quote-unquote owner, but that doesn't change the fact that there is a whole ethnic group that exists there, and that doesn't change the fact that that was their home before we decided to,
give it to someone else.
Give it to someone who didn't necessarily have claim to that. Sure, Britain won, the Ottoman Empire fell, but I mean, so much land was divided after World War I, and, so many people became colonial states. Think of Africa. They carved up a lot of Africa, a lot of Asia, a lot of Europe. So many things happened since then, and I think so much geopolitical change happened after World War I, and especially after World War II. We see the fall of the Ottoman Empire. Even thinking of USSR after the 60s and 70s, and then the 80s whenever they fell, things can change so quickly, but that doesn't erase the fact that a whole ethnic group exists there, and that ultimately is their home. So it's not going to change their claim that they feel that they have to that land.
Yeah, and all of that makes sense. Like I said, it would be very annoying to be living somewhere and then have some governing body just be hey, by the way, we sold your land, so go ahead. You know what I mean? It'd be oh, I didn't sign up for this. You know what I mean? So I do think that there are some historical things that could maybe reach out, and question this, but the base argument is super frustrating for the Palestinian people who are there, and I understand the frustration that would be garnered from there, unrelated to the legality of everything. It would just be
just
a horrible experience, regardless,
Think
right?
Of, this happening to you, kind of.
Exactly. So the next thing that I hear often, and this is my least knowledgeable point, so prepare for that. But I have heard that from the history from 47 to what I imagine would be close to October 7th, that there were offers to partition that land from the Israel people to kind of give Palestinians some of it, and then that the Palestinians wouldn't accept any of the offers, or they thought that they were also unfair or ridiculous or something like that, and that like what this paints is a picture that the Israel people are trying to, try to give the land back and trying to fight for peace, but the Palestinian people won't accept any of it. I imagine that the way that this is framed is really terrible. So I guess, like, walk me through this and help me on this.
I mean, Israel has only been taking more and more land since 1947. Through the 1967 war, and then after that through illegal settlements. And you can imagine that it's already frustrating that Israel was already given so much land in 1947, and hundreds of thousands were displaced from their land and forced to live on a smaller piece of land. But after that, they just continue to take more and more land up until now. And this happens right now through illegal settlements. And these illegal settlers are violent. They burn people's homes down. They kill people. And they basically act with impunity because the Israeli government doesn't do anything about it because they support it, So that's kind of where we're at. And that's what's been going on.
Yeah. And so the history would be that, like, even though these plans to divvy it up have been offered, it's like...
I don't know if they were offered, but this is the reality.
But on top
happening.
of that, they have also been stealing land, and so it's like, even though these, like, they could say, hey, we'll give you this, but like behind the scenes, they're just stealing a bunch of stuff, and it's like, what's the point of this plan if you're just taking it anyway, right? Something along those lines. Okay, that makes sense. I think that the most the event that had kind of triggered the biggest response to this, and the event that actually sparked your guys' organization, is October 7th. So can you guys kind of like walk me through what this is, like why it's a big deal, what happened, and then why people know about it or have thoughts about it?
So October 7th obviously was a very big day, and it's kind of sparked or reignited kind of this hope for Palestinian liberation. People have always been, talking about protesting for Palestine. That's always been going on, but it's just never been on such a scale before. And so October 7th obviously was used as this time to manufacture consent for genocide. And, like, we're not saying that horrible things didn't happen on October 7th. They did, okay? But you can't use October 7th as this pretext to commit a genocide, to commit ethnic cleansing, to raise Gaza to the ground and, annihilate a people. And, so many lies came out of October 7th, too, like the 40 beheaded babies lie. I mean, you have the U.S. president going out and saying, I saw images of 40 beheaded babies. And he didn't because they don't exist, because the Israeli government released a list of the victims, and I believe there were 2 babies, which is obviously a tragedy. I mean, children should never be involved, but they were not beheaded. So you can see how this kind of twist on the narrative changes how people feel and makes it look like, oh, Israel has the right to defend itself. Because you hear 40 beheaded babies and you're like, oh my goodness, nothing could be worse than that. You're like, these people are savages, right? Mm-hmm. But that's not what happened. And so things like this were used by Israel to, in the beginning, manufacture this kind of consent for genocide. And I still, to this day, hear people say, 40 beheaded babies, because the mainstream media did not bother to correct itself after that, because they don't care, because there's this pro-Israel agenda that's going on here.
Right. Yeah, and I actually remember hearing about that, and even just on its face, I was like, it's like, okay. And that was kind of near somewhat of the beginning of, like, the AI scare, like, once AI started really starting, and people were, it was hard to figure out what was real and what wasn't. What I will say, too, is that I think now is an important distinction to bring Hamas into this conversation, because I think that one of the reasons why they get brought up so much is because a lot of pro-Israel people will blame Hamas for the attack on October 7th. And then they use that to make a distinction between Palestinian people and then Hamas, which the pro-Israel people will mark as a terrorist organization, is what they will say. Mm-hmm. And so I guess, like, how do you guys feel about this distinction? Do you think this is the proper place to put them in? Or, like, talk to me about the difference between these two groups, and if you think they should even be mentioned, like, talk to me about this group.
Okay, so we'll start off with this. When you have an occupation, you have resistance, because occupied people have a right to resist their occupier and to achieve self-determination. That's under international law. And that includes armed resistance, as long as you are not harming civilians, which civilians were harmed on October 7th. Mm-hmm. And so you would just classify these as war crimes. That doesn't mean that you classify them as a terrorist org. They're a resistance group. So whatever happens in that process, you punish these people in a court of law. But that doesn't mean you delegitimize the Palestinian resistance, because they do have a right to resist their occupier. And so that's kind of where a lot of people talk, like you said, about Hamas. They're just like, well, this is Hamas, this is not the Palestinian people. Well, Israel's bombing Gaza, and it's razed Gaza to the ground, because it's not just about Hamas, it's about genocide, it's about ethnic cleansing. So that Hamas argument only, I think, went so far. When you see right now that almost all the buildings in Gaza have been destroyed, every hospital has been bombed, all the schools have been bombed, you know that's not about Hamas, it's about genocide and ethnic cleansing. So that argument, it's not hold anymore.
I feel like at the root of it, like at the beginning too, a lot of people, like, it was so easy to conflate, like, oh, Hamas and Palestine, and so one conversation was about the other. And we've even been criticized by people on campus, like, oh, because we haven't specifically denounced Hamas, then therefore we are supporting them. And it's like, supporting Palestine, supporting the state of Palestine, supporting the people in Palestine, like, that's not my license to tell you, yes, I'm supporting Hamas, I love terrorist groups. Like, that's like, it's nonsensical. And I just feel like that was a reason for people to delegitimize the movement, to say, like, well, you're just supporting a terrorist group, you don't actually care about this. But I mean, it's just such blatant violation of international law to go after hospitals, to go after schools, to go after civilians, and premise that under pretext, like, yeah, we're just looking for Hamas because they are apparently there every time. And it's like, sure, you can use that excuse, but I mean, it's not a proportional response in any way, shape, or form to raise a hospital to the ground, to remove people for just existing. Like, it's not, I don't understand how that could be a justification in any sense of the word.
I mean, that's not even to mention that you're not allowed to attack the people you're occupying under international law. So if we even start at that baseline, Israel is not allowed to attack people of Gaza because they're occupying them. So starting there, Hamas is not an excuse. Self-defense is not an excuse to raise Gaza to the ground.
Right. Well, what I will say too, and just this will probably be the last piece of the argument, and then we can just talk about what's happening. You know what I mean? But this is, I feel like, the most convincing pro-Israel side of this is this distinction between Hamas and Palestinians. So how the argument goes is something along the lines of Hamas is purposely hiding itself in places that are occupied with Palestinian civilians. And so the idea is, do we let them hide, which would be kind of the idea of, like, negotiating with terrorists, but not even to use, like, a loaded term, but it's, if they can set the boundaries for how they get to be attacked, they will win and they will be invulnerable, something along those lines. And so if you have a group that is purportedly as dangerous as they are supposed to be, or something along those lines, as violent as they're supposed to be, or something along those lines, you have to attack them. And then the question of intentionality becomes, what did you do to make sure that the attacks were as little in civilian deaths as reasonably expected? Something along those lines. So I guess, like, how do you guys engage with that kind of idea, with it being justified in that kind of way?
I think with the entire force of the American military behind you, I think you should have a better military force that is apparently so well trained and so well funded that you should be able to have special operations to specifically
they have
pinpoint
great
these
intelligence
people.
too.
Exactly.
They know where to target.
So that's
but
why I
they
don't think
just
it's
choose to indiscriminately.
exactly
Because Hamas is not the goal.
Mm-hmm.
The goal is genocide and ethnic cleansing.
like
And even if Hamas was the goal, you cannot bomb this. Gaza Strip is tiny, and it's so densely populated. You can't bomb the entire strip, and you can't eradicate Hamas without literally wiping out all of Gaza. You can't. And so there's no way that can be a legitimate goal or a legitimate excuse. And, like was mentioned earlier, you can't bomb the people you're occupying. So, and if there was no occupation, there would be no Hamas. So this would not even be an issue.
Right. I think that what the idea would be is, like, imagine that they are like a terrorist organization. You would be invulnerable in a highly populated place, which is arguably why they chose to be there. Is the Israel argument, right? And so it's like the special ops.
Israel has their military headquarters in Tel Aviv. Does that mean that you can carpet bomb Tel Aviv to get to their military headquarters? No, you can't. Like, that doesn't make sense.
Well, the idea would be that they are
densely populated area.
Yeah.
You can't harm civilians like that.
Yeah, I would agree with you, but the idea is the reason why the Hamas would be demarked a terrorist organization is because they don't need to follow those rules, is the idea. And so they get to hide under the population of people and also do not have to follow international law, because that's why they're denounced as a terrorist organization, because they already weren't following international law. And so the idea is, it's like, if you were to truly believe, or it were to be true, that they are a terrorist organization that needs to be stopped, something along those lines, if that were to be true, what other way, like, what else would you expect from Israel to do but do what they've been doing?
Well, I guess it's hard to answer this because they're a resistance organization. But you said, like, if they were, you just, I don't know, but you can't carpet bomb. Like, it's just, I think I don't need to get into the ifs, because we know the reality. We know the facts. We know the law. This is just blatant violations of international law. You say Hamas doesn't follow international law. Well, Israel has literally broken every law on the books. So
Right.
I don't feel the need to get into this kind of, like, what if,
Yeah. I feel like if we're in terms of like an underdog situation, like I honestly feel like a lot of things happen because of like desperation. And we allow this to happen because we don't provide Palestinians or like resistance groups with a legitimate means of becoming a nation state, to become legitimized, to become someone with self-determination. So when we don't provide avenues for people, like, what do we expect them to do? I mean,
and they've even tried, the people of
many
Gaza have
times.
tried peaceful resistance.
Exactly.
Protests. Back in 2018, Israeli snipers went and they shot at these peaceful protesters. They killed over 200 people, wounded thousands, and you had Israeli soldiers going on and bragging about how, they targeted so many kneecaps or whatever. Like, they were giving these people lifelong disabilities. And this is, like, documented in a UN report, like, not something I watched on TikTok or whatever.
Sure.
But, like, they just act with such impunity. And so when you're at that point, when you've tried every single type of resistance, what are you supposed to do? Because October 7th was intended to free, you shouldn't take hostages, obviously. That goes against international law. But the intent of that was to free the thousands of Palestinian hostages that Israel has. And they're hostages because Israel just arbitrarily detains people, West Bank, Gaza. And these people are tortured, they're raped, they're sexually assaulted. And so this was supposed to be a deal to exchange these hostages for those hostages. And this kind of deal was proposed, I think, as early as October 8th, October 9th. But Israel refused that because the goal is genocide. The goal is cleansing.
Right. The reason why I bring up these points and I lay them out in this way is because there are two arguments, and then you need to have some way to falsify one of them because the evidence would be the same for both. So the way that you guys are describing it is perfectly reasonable to assume that Israel is genociding a population of people purely for the love of the game or racism or something like that. They just want to do it. What you're saying is a completely reasonable way of constructing the details. However, there's also a completely reasonable way to construct the details to match the Israel's point of view. What differentiates these two is some sort of foundational or fact basis along the way. Like, oh, that's not actually true. So in the defense about the carpet bombing, you had said that the Hamas is a resistance organization. And that framing is very likely to be true given the Palestinian position. But it being a resistance organization requires the foundation that you had said at the beginning about whose land was it at the beginning. And so now we'd have to go back because from the pro-Israel perspective, it would be like, well, they're not a resistance organization. It's been ours the whole time or something like that, right?
I mean, you have to look at the facts and the law. So I can say that this studio is mine, but it's not. Like, it doesn't matter. I can make up whatever narrative I want, and it can make sense. But you just need to look at the facts and the law to see what's going on. And we look to, the evidence that we see. We look to experts like the UN, like human rights organizations to tell us what a genocide is. We don't look to Israel, who's committing a genocide, or to Israel's supporters to give us their opinion on what a genocide is, or whose land it is and things like that. So I think it's just
like sense. in a vacuum too, like just looking at this conflict in and of itself, like no matter whose land it was in the first place, like sure they're a resistance group, they're a terrorist group, whatever you want to label it as, like what we're seeing with just the sheer devastation that is occurring like in Gaza and the West Bank, like there's no justification to that. Like even if they're a terrorist group, it's horrible, they killed all these people on October 7th, like in a proportional sense, like it's not proportional in any way. Like there's no justification for the fact that this has been going on for almost 2 years. We've been watching it live streamed every day of our lives, watching children with like their arms and legs blown off, their entrails like hanging out. Like we're so desensitized to what we see because we're so used to seeing it that we can't call it for what it is. Like a spade is a spade. Like we're watching an entire population of people be wiped out simply for existing in a space that's the wrong space for them, even if it wasn't theirs in the first place.
Whatever the argument is,
there is no justification.
There's no justification.
Yeah, well, and like I said, following the origin and the way that you guys have laid it out, I completely agree with you. The only other thing that I feel is important to clarify, or at least talk about, is the use of the word genocide in describing it. So in the way that maybe I've outlined the pro-Israel argument, would that, whether or not it's regarded as that, I mean like legally speaking, what the idea would be is that when you're attacked, that genocide is an externality of an otherwise intentional decision to do something else. And it's not actually like an intentional decision. It's a specific intention to kill a group of people based on certain characteristics. Whereas what pro-Israel people would be arguing is that is actually just an externality of an intentional decision to kill a specific population, which they've deemed as terrorists, something along those lines. So I guess how do you guys feel about that?
So you can't find genocide without the intent. So genocide is specifically about the intent. Otherwise, even if you're killing like 1 million people, those are just crimes against humanity if you don't have that intent to, wipe out the group in whole or in part. So the UN recently, this month, released its report. And this is from a UN independent commission. And they reported that this is genocide. And so for genocide, you need to find 3 out of the 4 following acts, and they found all 4. And so the first one is killing members of the group. And so obviously we know that, over 65,000 Palestinians have been killed. These are very conservative estimates. They don't include people under the rubble. They don't include people who have died due to, the indirect physical conditions of what's going on. And so you have these deaths. And then you also have over 100 documented cases of snipers literally shooting children in the head and in the chest, and this includes toddlers.
Yes.
And this is based off of physician testimony. And this is all from the UN report, you know? And we can see this on Instagram every single day. So there's no reason to doubt any of what they're saying. So why else would you shoot children in the head, in the chest? Why else would you shoot toddlers if your intent is not genocide? Because there's no legitimate goal to shooting a toddler, right? So that was just the first prong. The second one is causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group. That kind of goes into what we talked about earlier with the rape and the sexual assault of the Palestinian detainees. And you have over 11,000 Palestinian hostages in Israeli prisons right now. And they go through this kind of torture and sexual assault every day. And this is all well documented by human rights organizations. And the UN report found that these soldiers who are doing these things against the Palestinian detainees don't do it just for their kind of sick individual gratification. It's systemic. It's to humiliate and destroy Palestinians. So that's another thing that goes for intent for genocide. And then you also have, for this prong, that Gaza right now has the highest rate of child amputees. The UN report said that I think about 10 children per day since October 7th, this is on average, have lost one or two limbs. And this is without anesthesia. So these children are getting their limbs amputated without anesthesia. That's unimaginable atrocities happening right now. And we're funding them. And then for the third one, it is deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. So we talked about the systematic destruction of schools, homes, universities, mosques, churches, cultural centers, just trying to wipe out Palestinian identity, trying to make this place unlivable for Palestinians so that they either have to leave or, that they just die. And they've also dismantled the healthcare system, obviously. Every single hospital in Gaza has been bombed. You only have a few partially functioning hospitals left. I believe over 1,600 healthcare workers have been killed, and they were targeted for being healthcare workers because the goal is to not have a working healthcare system. The goal is to get as many people to die as possible, so maybe by that point, they'll feel like they want to leave. So that's what's going on right now with that third prong. There's obviously the famine. The IPC just said that this is a famine, and over 440 people have died due to starvation, just due to starvation. And so people are starving right now. Israel's not letting in any food, water, aid, electricity. And you have the GHF, which is the Gaza Humanitarian Fund, run by the US, where people go to get aid and they're shot at. Mm-hmm. Starving people go to get aid and they're shot at by American and Israeli snipers. And at this point, I believe thousands have died due to this. And so why would people go to get food when they know they're going to be shot if they're not starving, And so the final prong is imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group. And that's where Israel targeted a clinic last year, I believe, where 4,000 embryos were there. This is Gaza's largest fertility clinic. They destroyed 4,000 embryos and 1,000 sperm samples and eggs. And so all 4 of these were found by the UN report. And the UN report also said, sorry, I'm talking a lot. The UN report also said that this is the only reasonable inference that you can make from Israel's conduct as well as the statements of their officials that they're committing a genocide, that there's this intent to commit a genocide. And, Israeli officials are pretty honest about their genocidal rhetoric. Usually it's kind of hard to find intent for genocide, in these cases, but they just have such impunity that they literally say things like Palestinians are human animals. They say things like everyone is fair game, even the children. They say things like Hamas and Palestinians are one and the same. Like, so basically saying that they need to destroy all Palestinians because their goal is to destroy Hamas. You know, just things like wipe them all out. And these things are said publicly.
So, I mean, we literally had a quote today from Netanyahu where he said he, quote unquote, needed to finish the job.
Yeah.
They don't hide the ball at all. And I think that's what's so ridiculous about, like, this question. I mean, it feels ridiculous to me because it's like you see it right before your eyes. And, I mean, Rawan can read you the prongs, the elements. I mean, as law students, we're like, yep, they're all there.
But
like,
we see it happening. You don't need to know the prongs to know that they intend genocide.
Exactly.
And you know, we see these videos every day of them just talking about their genocidal intent, and they're normalized, you know, in Israeli society in general. So that's, you know, that's how they were able to find genocide.
Yeah, what I will say too though is that the quotes do I feel like a much better job of conveying this intent, because all four of those prongs I feel like could be reasonably explained by a search for Hamas and then an externality of killing Palestinians. And that, like, imagine Hamas was purposely hiding in a hospital where all of those frozen embryos were there, right? Or the birth thing. Like, imagine they were hiding specifically there, and then that was an externality. Or the amputee people are, you know, the amputee children are mostly an externality of the bombing that's necessary for getting Hamas out. You know, something along those lines. Like, all four of those prongs could align with this kind of intent if you don't use the quotes to kind of back up that it is the intent. So all of that describes what a mass murdering is, what a mass genocide is, but it doesn't imply that somebody is committing a genocide. It is only implying that a genocide is happening. Right. In the same way that, like, the Nazis, I feel like, would have been genocided under this without the intention of killing a group for them being a group. You know what I mean? So it was that intention that I was kind of looking for, not necessarily is a genocide happening, it's is Israel committing a genocide is kind of the important question, which I feel like was stated well with the quotes and stuff.
Yeah. You do have to have, like, this intent, and I think from these four prongs, you usually, in most cases, you have to infer the intent from what's going on, right? But like you said, we have these specific statements of Israeli officials, Israeli military personnel going out and being like, we're gonna, you know, wipe them all out. We're gonna destroy them. We're gonna show them, you know, what happens when you go against Israel. These are all just publicly stated, and they incite the Israeli public against Palestinians too. So that's how the UN was able to just be like, this is the only reasonable inference, because you said, you know, there can be other inferences, but when you look at the evidence, this is the only reasonable inference.
Right. And so that's why I would say when you're using the word genocide and you're talking about it like that, it needs to be somewhat specific as to what you actually are meaning, right? So what you would say maybe instead that would be agreed upon by both sides is that unreasonably incredibly large groups of Palestinians are being killed in the crossfire of a military occupation that is not supported by our governing bodies. Something along those lines, just because I feel like the word genocide implies an intent that I feel like is only backed up by these kinds of quotes, which I feel like is important, but I just feel like it's a different kind of thing that you're talking about. And this way you could engage pro-Israel people with this too, and say, like, look, you don't even have to agree, even though the UN agrees, you don't have to agree with me on this, but what I'm saying is that this is unreasonable, and then you kind of talk about the unreasonable nature of it. Because like I said, the entire pro-Israel argument kind of rests on this idea of Hamas existing, and they shouldn't exist, but they are purposely putting themselves in situations to inflict the most harm on the Palestinian people. And so that's like the other side of the argument too. And so to be able to address both when you're speaking, I think is somewhat important. I guess obviously it devalues the atrocities that might be happening to the Palestinian people, but if it gets you closer to a resolution, then I think that that's kind of important too.
I mean, I think the importance of the word genocide is the intent. So, because when you're talking about genocide, you're talking about them wanting to wipe out a population. So that's why it's important. That's why it's not just about, a lot of deaths. It's that Israel wants the land, and Israel wants Palestinians to leave the land either, by dying or by voluntarily leaving. So that's why it's really important to talk about genocide, because if we forget that, then, hopefully when a ceasefire happens, we'll just forget about, this kind of issue where Palestinians do want a free Palestine. They do deserve to have their own country. They deserve to live free on their own lands. So that's why we can't escape that label or escape talking about genocide and not just frame it as crimes against humanity.
Right. I do think that one of the difficult parts, and this will get back into a little bit about Hamas versus just the Palestinians in general, is that I feel like Hamas, there are a couple things that the pro-Palestinian or the pro-Israel people can kind of constantly weaponize against the pro-Palestinian people. And I wonder if there's a way to kind of break away from that and to say, like, Hamas is a problem, but that doesn't justify what's happening to the Palestinian people or something along those lines. I think the two big ones that I hear a lot are the fact that the idea that Hamas still has all of the hostages that it had at the beginning, they haven't been released yet, and the alleged mass rape on October 7th as well. So a resistance force has been accused of doing more than just resisting, doing something that's like inherently evil. And I think that those two things get pinned on Hamas. And so then when pro-Palestinian people are caught mushing themselves at that group, justifying that group, you are kind of giving pro-Israel people a layup to kind of just attack the whole group, when if you could separate them, it might be more effective. How do you guys feel about this idea?
So we don't focus on Hamas and what Hamas does. Like you said, we separate those things. We look at what's happening to the people of Gaza right now. And it's always the pro-Israel side, obviously, that tries to link everything to Hamas. But, forgetting what Hamas does, look at what the Israeli government does. I mean, there have been so many hostage exchange deals proposed that Hamas has agreed to that the Israeli government refuses to agree to. Again, because that is not the goal. I mean, you don't carpet bomb the place where your hostages are. You get your hostages back through negotiations.
All right, we're back. We had some technical difficulties with the recording, so it's been so long we forgot what we were talking about. But I imagine that it was really interesting and that a really awesome question or answer was coming. But we're going to wrap it up here soon, but I wanted to ask a few more questions just about the meta conversation. Something that we were kind of talking about off camera was just the importance of understanding the opposing side. So to me, and especially to a lot of pro-Israel people, is that the evidence that you guys are using to support the pro-Palestinian side it doesn't falsify the pro-Israel side, and in some cases it actually plays towards them. Most cases it doesn't, but in some it does. And so the idea is, like, it's important that you understand what the other side is communicating. But I imagine that having been involved in it for so long, you have had that bite you in the butt and weaponized against you, and like really unfair conversations. So I guess when it comes to having this conversation, what have your guys' experiences been with talking to people about this, and why is this conversation so bad or like so hard to have?
I mean, I think conversations like this are hard to have, especially with people that are like very pro-Israel because maybe they are Jewish. It's maybe they feel it's an attack on who they are as a person. And I think when it comes down to like identity, people can get really kind of fraught in conversations like that. And so I think like maybe people criticizing the Israeli government, like they feel like it's a criticism or an attack on them as like a person. And I think, I mean, in conversations like this, people who are pro-Palestine have definitely tried really hard to be like, this is not about being anti-Semitic. This is not about hating like Israelis. This is not about like hating Jewish people. It's about the fact that this state of Israel is committing these horrible acts. It's not about you as a person. I mean, if that's personally your view, that you think this is like okay, that's your prerogative. You know, you can sit with that, you can live with that. But I think as a matter of like, this is not a target on you. It's broader than that. But I think that's what makes this conversation just complicated.
Right. I mean, we're just at a point where you really can't try to justify the unjustifiable. I mean, Sam talked about this earlier. You just can't justify hundreds of thousands of deaths. You can't justify like entirely wiping out this city and displacing all of its people to live in refugee camps where you then bomb those refugee camps. You just can't justify these in any way, shape, or form. So that's where it's hard to have that kind of conversation.
Yeah. And the only other Israel point that I hear brought up a lot is they would say that there has been an effort to minimize the amount of casualties, and it's been more than any other group has ever done. I hear a lot about like they'll do knocks when bombs are coming, or they'll drop leaflets, or they will warn people that bombs are coming at a specific time or a specific place and that they need to evacuate and leave. Stuff like this. I don't know if this is all misinformation or how you guys feel about this kind of idea.
I mean, like, I've seen clips of the leaflets online before, so I mean, that's verifiable. But I mean, at the same time, like, if someone's telling you, leave your home, leave what, like, little you have left, leave what you cling to. Like, if someone's just telling you that because, like, oh, your life is in danger, like, that is your life. That's your home. That's everything that you have. Like, it doesn't feel fair to just tell people, get up and leave. And also, where are they going to go?
I mean, and then they do leave, and they're told to go to these safe zones.
And then they're still hurt.
Bombed in the safe zones.
Exactly.
So it's just, we're just dealing with a really dishonest, rogue state that really has no respect for international law, that really does not care about the loss of Palestinian life. And like we said, I mean, the goal is the loss of Palestinian life. So that's not a valid argument, even if you just look at the numbers. Because, I mean, if you're doing all these things, why are there hundreds of thousands of people dead?
Right. Well, I believe that there is an agreed upon number where like an expected amount of casualties or a historical amount of casualties compared to the operatives that were targeted / successfully killed. And I believe that in this conflict, at least the pro-Israel side has said that we are significantly under, despite the total loss of life is obviously horrific and it always is, but the casualty to intended operant deaths has been very, very low. Like, it's been a really good ratio. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this.
Like, more civilians were killed than they thought?
No, like the amount of
more fighters were killed.
Yeah, more intended opponents were killed. The proportion of intended opponents killed to civilians, the ratio is way lower than what is expected in any other war and by any other group of people in the area, is the argument. I'd have to look at the numbers. Even though the number is high, sometimes you can't just point to the total number and say that that's enough. You also have to kind of compare it to the intention.
For sure. I mean, I believe about 70% of casualties are women and children, which obviously does not mean that the other 30%, that all the men are Hamas. You know, that doesn't make sense. But from what I most recently heard, and these are estimates by the Israeli military, that they have conservatively killed 6,000, at most 8,000. And so this is way, way, way less than the confirmed deaths of 65,000. Obviously, we know more than 65,000 people have been killed in Gaza. So by their own estimates, that doesn't make sense. But that is used as a talking point by pro-Israel supporters, even though it's incorrect.
That would be 1/8, somewhere around there? I think the ratio that is like accepted, 1/10. I think the ratio that's accepted is closer to 1/50th for civilians to. This is bro science. I would just you'd have to look at it, but this is the kind of idea though, is that like the expected or allowed percentage is actually way higher than what is happening in this conflict. And the only other thing that, like I said, the problem is that everything kind of comes full circles to one initial justification, is that as a group of people like Hamas, if they were to intentionally be hiding in these populations, it would be difficult to, like, they are invincible would be the idea. And so that would kind of, the idea would be is the Israel can blame Hamas for why there are civilian casualties, to where if they were to hide in a different place, or if they were to go to a different place, there would be no civilian casualties. Now, whether that's a post hoc excuse for what they're doing, or whether that's a premeditated military thing, what I can say though is that that idea has been justified in every war previously and should be justified in the future. It's just a matter of what the actual intention is and what the actual truth is. Because if they were hiding there, that's the only response that you can do, other than what we were talking about off camera, which would be some sort of specialized military action, which is totally possible. I agree with you that we should be pursuing that and we should be doing that. Although, to be the lucky few that get to do that is not a desirable outcome for our soldiers, right? But I understand the idea though, and I agree with you on that. So I guess, do you have any closing thoughts on this kind of like, it's horrible when you're put in a position to where you're weighing civilian lives to like, just like using that metric when we're talking about real people like us three, like,
Right.
it's horrible to do that. So I understand the tabooness of this kind of line of argument. But if you guys have any other thoughts on this.
I mean, go ahead.
Oh,
Sorry.
From like a political science theories of war kind of perspective, I mean, something like this is only a natural consequence of how war has like shifted in our lifetime. I mean, it doesn't look the same as it used to in like the Civil War, where we're like lining up at each other and shooting each other from the trenches. Like,
now you just drop bombs.
Exactly. And we're not fighting organized states. We're fighting insurgent groups. We're fighting in like imbalanced like power struggles. I mean, if you look at the state of Israel and the amount of resources that they have compared to an entity like Hamas, like, I don't think it's fair to put on them these ideas of like Western civility, quote unquote. Like, I feel like that word is very loaded, but I mean, if you're fighting for your lifeline, if you're fighting for your country, if you're fighting for something that you feel like to your very core, like, this is something that I think as a human being that I deserve, then I think you're going to do what it takes. And maybe that's the same way Israel feels. But, like, I think they don't realize that they are a bull in a china shop. And Palestine is like a tiny little teacup. And they are just repeatedly smashing those little tiny bits over and over and over again. And, like, there's no equity, I think, is the problem here.
Right, and I think that's why we keep circling back, is we're kind of ignoring this issue of equity. The occupier and occupied, you can't equate them. So we can't act like this is the Israel-Hamas war. This is the Israeli occupiers
Backed by the U.S.
Yes, backed by the U.S., attacking these occupied people. So, and you wouldn't have this issue if they weren't occupying people. So that's how you kind of pull yourself out. You go back to the core of this issue. And so that's why it's not, whether they are hiding in civilian areas or not. What is the core of this issue? What is actually going on? And what is the intent of Israel in doing these things? I think that's the most important. And I think that's how we reach the truth, instead of, just playing what-if games.
Sure. Well, it was awesome having you two on. I've held you guys here for far too long with technical difficulties, but I always give you the opportunity to close the episode out. So if there's any advertising or plugging that you want to do, if there's any places that you suggest people go online and help out, fun stuff like that, and then any themes or any lasting messages that you want to give to people who have lasted this long in the episode, the floor is really your opportunity to kind of talk to the audience.
I mean, I think we just always encourage people to not be afraid to speak up for justice, not be afraid to speak up for Palestine. I mean, we are complicit in this if we are silent, because we pay for what's going on. And so people should always be protesting, people should be, boycotting, and these things work. Because if people weren't protesting, if people weren't boycotting, I mean, nobody
wouldn't be closing hundreds of thousands
yes.
of stores and firing all their employees right
yes
now.
Yes, and like nobody would be saying anything, and these people would just be suffering in silence. And you have journalists, documenting the suffering of their people so that we can do something.
And getting killed in the process.
Yes, getting targeted for documenting massacres so we can do something. And so we should at least be able to live up to that and not give up.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a pretty good message. I don't know.
Oh
Just not give up. I feel like it feels so easy now to give up because everything can feel so hopeless. There's so many things thrown at you from all sides. I mean, as a person living in America, like, we're insulated, but also we have our own issues too. So, I mean, keep fighting for like what is right. And I don't know. That's all we can do is just keep talking about it and do what we can.
Yeah, well, thanks so much for coming on. I thought this was really wonderful, and thank you guys for sticking through with all of the technical difficulties. You guys are great.
Thank you.